Okay, guys, today is the day we're going to discuss the Bitcoin halving. Let's roll that intro and get right down into it. Okay guys, so today we are going to be discussing the Bitcoin halving event and where we currently find the position for Bitcoin and what might happen next as we look at the historical price movements in relation to the Bitcoin halving. So what we're going to do is we're going to start things off by explaining what's in front of you right here. We have the green lines on this monthly chart. These represent the Bitcoin halving events from 2013, 16, 2020, and obviously 2024 this year. We then have these little grey lines. These represent the 1st of January on every single year. And what they allow us to do is see any correlations between the beginning of quarter one and the Bitcoin halving event. So specifically what we're interested in is we're interested in the first quarter of every year that we have a Bitcoin halving event. And we want to see whether there's a correlation to the price movement within the Bitcoin halving years or the cycles to BTC. And for the most part, it's quite an interesting tell. So let's go over to the very beginning over here and zoom in a little bit. Okay, so what we can do is we can see here that the Bitcoin halving event actually happened towards the end of the year, November of 2012, right before we saw the 1st of January 2013. This is because it is not actually a 4-year cycle for BTC. The Bitcoin halving event actually isn't 4 years, and it actually changes every single year. I think it's less by 1 month. And so this one here actually doesn't really have any kind of relation to quarter one as far as we could tell. What we could do is we could see that the Bitcoin halving event happened, hardly any price action for a quarter, and then we took off into that new year. Okay, so it's really quite difficult to look at this and say, yeah, we basically have, some kind of would be pump for the Bitcoin halving event or some kind of dump for the Bitcoin halving event. But what we can do is we can take a look at, January the 1st over here, and we can see that this quarter that led into the year was actually negative. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark that up here. It's actually the low was 48%. Okay, but I'm going to take a little yellow box here and just mark out that entire quarter like this, right? So that's those 3 months there, and it is 48%. Okay, so we know that there's a 48% decrease in quarter one for the year that we had the Bitcoin halving event. Let's going to look at it this way for now. Okay, as we kind of progress through, we can see once we kind of got the Bitcoin halving event, we were stagnant for about 3 months, and then we lifted off into the beginning. Okay, so we had the 1st January 2013, and we saw this great lift in the first quarter. Okay, so the first quarter here, we're going to lift this up actually and snap it to there. So the first quarter of the year after we had the Bitcoin halving event was up 652%. Okay, so the year going, the first quarter going into a Bitcoin halving event was down, but the first quarter after the Bitcoin halving event was actually very positive. Okay, let's progress on over to our next halving event. Our next halving event here was July of 2016. Okay, so it is after this year. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to highlight the first quarter here, okay, and we're going to drag it across, and we can see that this quarter was actually red. And we were down 26% leading into the Bitcoin halving event. Okay, from the halving event, we actually saw a decrease, okay, on the news, I guess that we could argue, 34%. So we can see here that this actually ended, or coming close to the end actually, of that second quarter, beginning of quarter three. Then, of course, we can get into if I actually snap this to the right place, we get to the next year, so 2017, okay, and that first quarter was actually green. Okay, we see some red months in here, January, and we see March, but February is actually reasonable. And this was a lift of 79%. So we have the first quarter leading into the Bitcoin halving event, a red quarter, 24%. We have the Bitcoin halving event where we actually see negative price action for the first couple of months. And then we lift up, and then to get into the new year after the Bitcoin halving event, we see 17% move to the upside. Let's progress on over to the one that we're most familiar with. It's the most recent one, which was 2020. Okay, so here we can see the first quarter that led into a Bitcoin halving event. We actually see negativity here, but again, this is fueled by the pandemic. We have to bear that in mind. It was a 59.77% down. The Bitcoin halving event in itself happened in May, and we can see that actually price was very stagnant on that news. It didn't create any major movements. Each candle here, by the way, guys, is 1 month, right? So we can see that the Bitcoin halving event had no impact on the price action. And as we get into the first quarter, following on from the Bitcoin halving event, we can see that we lifted up 122% in that 3-month period. Okay, so let's zoom out of here for a second and kind of take that into kind of reality for a little bit, right? So what do we see? Well, we can see that the first quarter leading into the year that a Bitcoin halving event unfolds, we actually see negativity in terms of the price action. We can see this for the 3 previous quarter ones that led into a Bitcoin halving event, i.e. we take a look back at 2012, we can see that there's a negative price action leading into the year for the Bitcoin halving event. That is then followed by the first quarter after. So quarter 1 after the Bitcoin halving event is green, and we see a lift up here in 2013 by 652%. We can then see the first quarter that led into the 2016 halving event. So quarter 1 that led into the 2016 halving event was down 24%. And the first quarter after the Bitcoin halving event was up 79.68%. So again, we saw no actual price action on the event of the halving. This is very consistent no matter what halving event you look at. It's very flat. It has no price impact whatsoever. But what we do see is the first quarter after, so quarter 1 after the Bitcoin halving event, actually was lifting price to the upside. We then take a look at where we were in 2020. So the first quarter of 2020 was negative. Again, this was down to a pandemic that we saw, but also it's consistent with the previous 2 cycles that we saw for Bitcoin halvings, essentially down 59.77% in 2020. The first quarter. We have the Bitcoin halving event, no major price action for the first couple of months. And then obviously as we get into 2021, as we all remember, quarter 1 is very green at 122%. So that brings us over to where we are today. Okay, we know that a Bitcoin halving event is going to happen this year, which means is quarter 1 just going to be consistent with the 3 previous cycles where we see quarter 1 being a bit of a sell-off month? I personally do think we are likely to see about a 30% reduction in Bitcoin's price over the first quarter of 2024. But this is not a bad sign. Once we get through this, I think we'll kind of a bit of an accumulative phase, somewhere down at around that 30K area, and that'll be quarter 2, and we'll lift up and we'll start to actually go up into significant high levels again in quarter 3. In quarter 4, we might start to see a little bit of a correction before we get into quarter 1 of 2025. And I think it's that quarter that we really do start to get into a nice big lift for Bitcoin. Okay, so I think we are kind of all quite agreed that we're going to see some really nice, healthy price action for Bitcoin, specifically as we see things like the Bitcoin spot ETFs, and we start to see some of these fundamental things like Bitcoin halving events actually unfolding and actually taking the price action of Bitcoin up to these fantastic heights that we know that it can achieve. But we also have to be quite realistic. The data is quite clear to us that time and time again, we actually expect movements to the upside, and yet as retail investors we see the opposite. A lot of hopium is out there on these Bitcoin spot ETFs to lift the market to the upside, but we have to be very clear, and I kind of spoke about this yesterday in the Cheeky Crypto Uncensored channel, about how we generally don't see institutional investors just throwing money at a project just because it's launched. Instead, what you tend to find is there has to be extensive due diligence done by each individual institutional investor before they actually go ahead and throw their capital into a product such as a Bitcoin spot ETF. And then, of course, we have to argue, is a Bitcoin spot ETF going to actually launch one day after it gets approval? It's very unlikely. And most likely scenario is we're a good 3 to 6 months out before we see any decent capital flowing into Bitcoin spot ETFs. And therefore, just like all the previous big major milestones for Bitcoin from a fundamental point of view, whether that's Coinbase IPOs, futures ETFs, but I think a Bitcoin spot ETF is going to be the same as the others, a sell the news event. That would really tie in nicely with this cycle theory that we have here, seeing that Bitcoin as its first quarter into a Bitcoin halving year is a red quarter, as in we see negative price action. This could be exactly what we need to see in order to gear ourselves up for a fantastic run in quarter 2 and quarter 4 of this year, and also will allow us to really have a good strong movement into quarter 1 of 2025. So if you want to check out a little bit more about my thoughts and opinions on what I think is going to be unfolding this quarter, you should probably check out this video that I recorded yesterday.